Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to this week's episode of the Digital Law News, brought to you by Digital Law and produced by Anson Evaluate. So just a little bit about us. We look at stories every week that are coming up in the news, both from the regulators and kind of the general news stories. And this week we've got some fairly juicy bits to be talking about after kind of Christmas. So first of all, we will be looking at maybe one of the most important pop artist at the moment is Taylor Swift. But first of all, I'm Amelia Davies and I'm joined by Peter. And Peter, if you want to introduce yourself.
Yeah, so my name is Peter. I'm a solicitor and the managing director at Digital Law, a specialist law firm that looks at all of this stuff on a day-to-day basis. We don't do anything else apart from look at the law related to data and technology. So as Amelia says, lots of really interesting and a few quite high-profile stories have been taking place over the last few weeks. So as a curtain raiser to 2024, I will pass back to Amelia.
Thanks, Peter. So kicking us off is arguably the queen of pop, that is Taylor Swift. And so she has become the latest celebrity to have had her likeness hijacked by scammers using AI. And this is where fraudsters have created a fake version of the singer for a cookware advert. This is quite interesting. I mean, I don't know that Taylor Swift is very well known for her cooking, but nonetheless, I mean, if you're a big Taylor Swift fan and you saw an advert with a deep fake, I imagine that could persuade you to purchase some cookware. And I believe it's Le Creuset. So
it is.
You know, we're talking about some fairly expensive cookware here.
We are, and I think it's the unique mixture of those people that like Taylor Swift and Le Creuset products that were being targeted here. So basically, people saw a post appearing on social media platforms like Facebook, where they would have seen a video of Taylor Swift saying there are thousands of these Le Creuset cookware products that are available, and they're totally free of charge. You just have to send us $9 for postage and packing, and you'll receive your free Le Creuset product, which, of course, these things are usually worth hundreds of pounds per item and are very highly priced. So, of course, if you think I'm going to get that for free, and it must be true because look, there's Taylor Swift saying it's true, that meant that the scammers ended up being moderately successful here with a fairly high-profile scam. There were, of course, no Le Creuset products. And then when people started paying their $9, they were handing over their payment card information, and more payments ended up then being taken. But there's a few. I think the implications and takeaways here are several. I think the first of all is just the fact that this has of course been done using AI, and probably fairly easily and cheaply using AI as well. It's interesting that I think I see a lot of AI generated stuff of Taylor Swift anyway on a lot of different networks where people are just flooding it with AI content, saying, "Look what we can do." I mean, when Taylor Swift was first being linked with Travis Kelce, the American NFL player for the Kansas City Chiefs, and she started turning up at NFL games at the Arrowhead Stadium, there were then loads of images online. You know, suddenly it was one of the memorable ones I saw was actually it was literally, rather than it being Patrick Mahomes, quarterback, throwing the ball to Travis Kelce, instead they had Taylor Swift there saying only she was going to throw the ball to her boyfriend. Little things like that, but literally you see, as I say, loads of AI being generated with Taylor Swift all the time. In this instance, it's then being used, obviously, for fraud. And the other thing is just the fact it's done so easily. A few years ago, I think there was a really high-profile one where Tom Cruise appeared.
Tom Cruise, definitely. And I'm not sure whether it was actually used for fraud specifically. I think it was just an example of how a high-profile individual could be quite easily copied. And it was very difficult in that specific case to actually tell who was who. And I mean, as I said to you, Peter, from a personal perspective, I was looking at this like, you can see that there's a likeness, but I'm not sure whether I'd go as far as saying, well, they look the same. But it's like you say, because we work in this industry, we're very cynical. We do take everything with a very heavy pinch of salt. Whereas if you've got a younger teenage fan going, oh, mummy, Taylor Swift is flogging these Le Creuset products. I want a Taylor Swift bowl or what have you, or
Sure, there are 12-year-olds up and down the country who are, really, champing at the bit to get all of that great cookware. But the thing is that when you see this stuff flick by in your feed on, say, Facebook or TikTok, are you going to necessarily stop and think, oh, well, actually, that doesn't look quite right. The lighting isn't quite right there, and the chin line isn't quite right. I mean, the thing with AI at the moment, sometimes I saw one image the other day where it turned out that you looked at the image and thought, that isn't quite right. And it turned out it was because the person only had one leg. But it turned out that when you sit someone in a certain angle, it wasn't particularly clear they only had one leg. So in the comments, there was other people saying, well, I can't tell what the issue is. Is it this? Is it that? No, it's the fact they've got one leg. But it wasn't obvious.
Yeah.
But AI does this all the time. If you look very carefully at the hands, that's always a big giveaway, or the faces, if there's lots of faces in the crowd.
It's almost like searching for Photoshop, when you look at it when celebs are posting these beautiful photos, and it's like, well, she's actually got 7 toes.
Exactly. But the thing here is that very often you're using an AI platform, you've just typed something in, a brief wait of a few seconds, it generates something, and you go off and run with it. And I think this video was probably generated fairly easily using one of the freely available AI platforms. Now, I think the thing with that Tom Cruise image deepfake from a few years ago is that was generated by someone who looked a bit like Tom Cruise filming a video and then post-production editing it using AI and other advanced techniques to make it look and sound like Tom Cruise. In this instance, it's the fact it's using the ubiquitous prevalence of AI to do this. So it's saying, yeah, they did this to look like Taylor Swift. How many other promotions online where you think it might be a celebrity, is it actually genuine? Is, I think, the thing to take away from this. You don't need to have someone who looks a little bit like Taylor Swift. You could just go out and do this quite easily, potentially, with some of the video and picture generation platforms that are out there.
You've mentioned as well Tom Cruise, but equally, quite recently, I think it was Scarlett Johansson. She actually took a company to and actually had a lawsuit against them because they'd used a deep fake of her without her permission, and therefore, that's, and people again like this Taylor Swift, they thought it was real.
Yeah.
And she wasn't promoting the dental plan that it seemed like she was, and she launched legal action in November, and so this is probably one of the first big stories, and probably going to keep seeing this. And
yes.
I think it's really urging our listeners to be vigilant when you do see things online where it's celebrities endorsing things and encouraging you to purchase things, and double checking the prevalence of that.
And indeed, a general little warning to everyone online. It is 2024 now. It's election year in the UK, in the US, and in a couple of dozen other democracies around the world. If you see what you think is a video or audio recording of something that one of the candidates is supposed to be saying, just think carefully about where you're hearing that from, who's sharing it, where it's come from, because it might be a deep fake. There's already been examples of deep fakes in the UK election. We've had audio recordings purportedly of Sir Keir Starmer and other politicians that were totally artificially created using AI and deepfake. And the point here is just stop and think before you make a value judgment about something you're hearing. Is it actually genuine? If you hear anything, oh God, how awful that is, I want to go and check on that. Well, go and then check on that party's website or that politician's actual social media feed and see if they actually have said it or not before reaching the conclusion. Because there's going to be so much of this, as I say, countries all around the world, from Taiwan to the US. You're going to have the primary campaign in the US before the general election in autumn. So lots of this all year round. And just stop and think, can you actually trust the thing that you've just seen online that may have made you really angry and irate about something? Is it actually genuine?
Thanks, Peter. So on that note, we will move on to our next story. And this is where we're looking at reviews. So this is fairly interesting, actually. So a cosmetic surgery firm is suing a customer, well, not just one, customers over bad reviews. I mean, on the surface, like, oh, crikey, that's a fairly extreme approach to take just to have a bad bad review. But actually, there's kind of darker surface going on here. And I think we were talking about it just previously, Peter, and the fact that it is kind of legal to be able to do this, but ethical, not really.
And for that reason, and the fact that the clinic in question is somewhat trigger happy with their litigation, I'm not going to name them. There has been press reporting of this in the Times and specialist legal press as well as other areas. But basically, there is a clinic that specialises in beauty treatments for thousands of pounds. Everything from facelift to eyelids to other treatments. For example, if you've lost weight and you want something done, there's a lot. They specialise in that. But where there have been those who have then been dissatisfied and they have then posted comments online saying, I wasn't very happy with what the treatment I received, they've then found themselves receiving legal letters threatening litigation, and in a couple of instances here, they've actually ended up being sued by the clinic.
Very interesting, the fact that, and that's quite extreme action to be taken, being sued by the clinic because you've given a bad review.
Yeah.
And I think the key takeaways that I had was the fact that in some cases, there was a threat of prison and jail in these cases because there was an injunction, I think, brought. And then if they then breach the injunction, then you can end up in jail. And that's very extreme when you're thinking, well, all I've done is left just a rubbish review because I had crummy service.
It was interesting that actually on Trustpilot, they actually put a banner up above the reviews saying, we found out that this company has been pressuring people to remove or edit their negative reviews from Trustpilot. By doing this, the company is limiting the information that's available on their profile pages, can lead to bias and compromise in the reliability of reviews. We're strongly against this. We want consumers to make decisions leave their reviews based on their experiences, blah, blah. You get the idea. And clearly, if you're facing litigation and angry, threatening letters from the clinic, that might put you off. From a legal perspective, it's interesting here that the clinic is using its own in-house lawyer, is then issuing legal proceedings at court for £10,000 or less, meaning that you're in the sort of lower claims tracks, which means that costs aren't quite the issue that they might be if it was left as, well, this is defamation and you've affected our business to, we've lost tens of thousands of pounds. Am I going to see you for 40, 50,000 pounds? Well, you'd have bigger cost implications to that than if you just do it at £10,000, which almost suggests the purpose here is to have someone who's just left a negative review. Not only are you receiving aggressive letters from this clinic, you then actually receive legal proceedings in the post. That's the thing then that would leave you thinking, my God, what are they doing? And it's just basically a tactic, a bullying tactic, bluntly, to then make you think, oh, I will end up taking the complaint down, and now that they've issued proceedings, probably end up having to pay them something to make them go away. There's been comparisons to this to what they call SLAP, strategic litigation against public participation, where very often you get wealthy corporations or individuals suing people, saying, stop posting nasty things, stop investigating, stop doing whatever it is to try and keep certain things quiet. So you've seen the legal system used as a mechanism to shut people down, hence this term SLAP that is being used. Now, in this instance, I don't know if we necessarily could call this a SLAP, but it is very aggressive use of litigation and the courts to try and influence then the reviews that are left online on platforms like Trustpilot.
And from a consumer's perspective as well, I know from my own personal experience, if I am researching something, I don't know, a product or a service, I'm going to be turning to services such as Trustpilot and other related services to check reviews, because that is just called doing your due diligence, understanding what's going on. And if you therefore checking this clinic's reviews and you see, oh, great, this is fab, they're all great, doesn't give you a well-rounded approach to what's to be expected. And it could be really affecting consumers. I mean, here we're talking about cosmetic surgery. That's not kind of a small service you're talking about. You're talking a lot of money and actually a procedure that could dramatically change your appearance. So, you would want to be able to have all the facts to be able to make an informed decision. But when you are getting kind of sued for defamation, you're not going to be seeing any of these reviews, which do actually give you a real fair insight into someone else's experience.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting that this clinic also has had poor ratings from the Care Quality Commission and seems to be facing investigation. So it looks like they're actually sort of fighting a battle on multiple fronts and being really aggressive with their online presence as part of that. I mean, I don't. You'd hope that this isn't something that's becoming common, but I think the point that we have to make here actually is that actually it is actually worth being thoughtful about the reviews that you leave online, insofar as it could lead potentially to these sorts of claims. I hope it doesn't. I hope this isn't widespread. It probably should make us perhaps pause once or twice before leaving a particularly negative or caustic review, perhaps. But also bear in mind that, Trustpilot here is saying, well, we don't support the actions of the clinic, but Trustpilot's not going to do anything to help someone who's on the end of litigation as a result of leaving a negative review, unfortunately. So it's just, I think, showing the limits of the fact that you can end up posting things on platforms that could lead to them technically being classed as defamation, even though we wouldn't endorse the steps being taken by this clinic in the aggressive way that they are going after the people who are just simply leaving reviews of their experiences. But this is clearly going to be an area of law that continues to develop. I'd also be interested if anyone listening to this now is actually saying if they've actually heard of similar examples of this in the country where they live or the jurisdiction where they are. If you do hear examples of this, then do get in touch where you hear of litigation by those who feel they've been adversely affected or defamed by a negative review online.
Thanks, Peter. So moving on to our next story, we are looking at copyright. And not just copyright, we're looking at how copyright and AI are becoming the latest battleground. So essentially here, we are looking at the fact that LLMs, so that's learning language model?
Large
language models, thank you. They are essentially going and scraping data from a variety of different websites, books, articles, you name it, they're scraping some data. And it's how copyright then is affected here, because essentially the whole point of copyright is looking at intellectual property. And the intellectual property in terms of, for example, a book, it will belong to the author in most cases. Therefore, when that book is then sold, the IP is then being given to that person for the sake of the book. But at the end of the day, the author is being paid for the sale of the book. Or, you go onto Amazon or any other booksellers and you get an e-copy. They're being paid for that copy. But in terms of the LLMs, they are not being paid or receiving any credits or royalties for the fact that their written work is being used.
No. And that's meant that we're now finding ourselves in the world of potentially high value litigation as a result. So indeed, platforms like ChatGPT, Meta's AI, they're a large language model that requires that you put data into it to then get data out. The higher quality data that you put in, the better the results that will come out. You put rubbish in, you will get rubbish out. So therefore, if you can sort of feed in high quality work, so it could be that could be published work, it could be news articles, encyclopedias, knowledge. The more you put into it, the better you'll get out. So, but the trouble is that are people necessarily willing to pay for that? Is the eternal question. And then if you're going to pay, how much? Interestingly, this has been enough for the New York Times to say that they aren't happy about this, and they have actually started to sue OpenAI, the company behind ChatGPT. The company behind OpenAI is Microsoft, big investor in OpenAI, big backer. But in a fairly blunt legal filing, New York Times has said, look, we think that OpenAI has trained ChatGPT on New York Times articles without permission or payment. and therefore threatening the model, the business model, and the future of high quality journalism. And this is the problem that certainly the written media are having now, is they're either giving away their content for free online, which means people won't go and buy the newspaper, or very often if you're giving away a lot, they won't then sign up to a subscription, or you have to put that content behind a paywall. The New York Times is in theory behind a paywall, but for however this has been done, ChatGPT has been surfing, taking all the information from those articles without permission or payment to the New York Times, and undermining that business model, and therefore meaning that they can't afford, if all their information is going to be taken by OpenAI and then circulated out by OpenAI, how are they supposed to pay hundreds of journalists around the world to do their job? And the thing is as well, it's not easy to, you're looking at then getting journalists, if you're going to have journalists to do months-long investigations into things that aren't particularly easy to identify. In the UK, we're currently going through the scandal around the post office. That scandal has taken 10 years more like 15 years of reporting, starting off with articles in Computer Weekly and Private Eye in 2010, up until we got a TV drama in 2014 that drew in 2024 that drew all the information together. But that's taken, a long, long time to cover that. That didn't write itself, and the point here is therefore they're saying, look, if our content is going to be used, we should be paid for it. So we have now had a couple of organizations have actually signed licensing agreements with AI platforms to say they're now paying a license to use our data, which will go into that platform and will be used by that large language model. But at least they're being compensated for the use of their product. But in a number of instances, Getty Images, who've never really, they're quite litigious anyway. They'll go after anyone who uses their stock pictures in a way that they aren't happy with or conflicts with their licensing. And in this instance, they've gone after, they've been quite annoyed about the use of a stable diffusion image generator that was basically using data from Getty Images to produce its products. That's a fairly new piece of litigation in the UK. We haven't seen the defence yet, but that kind of shows the fact that there are going to be a series of fights in this field of online copyright. We're also going to see things like the Intellectual Property Office in the UK is also working on a code of practice, in theory saying to news organisations, the creative industry, lobby groups, etc., that you need to actually have ways of dealing with this and to enter into those sort of licensing arrangements to try and make sure that you are at least then protecting your position. Same thing at an EU level as well.
This is well and good, but you mentioned the fact that, we would potentially be relying on licensing agreements. But the trouble is, if only certain companies will, for one, allow the licensing agreements, or even, okay, so you've signed a license agreement, but it's only for very specific articles or documents or what have you, you then end up with somewhat more biased opinion on the model because they're only being trained on a certain type of information.
Yes.
Therefore, you will have, for example, if you were searching about a political party, you may only receive a certain set of information because that's what they were trained on.
Yeah, and this comes down to the flaw in the system. Systems are only ever as good as the data that you put into them. If you want an example of that, there was basically a machine learning model that was being developed to try and help when it came to automating decisions when it comes to things like bail applications. This was in the US. And of course, they fed into it all of the court decisions that have been made in the past when it came to giving bail. So it therefore meant that all of the prejudices and biases of the judiciary was perpetuated in the model that was created because it was acquiring those biases and prejudices from those expressed over decades of judgments beforehand. So you weren't actually getting a sort of pure application of the law in each individual specific scenario. You were getting the law according to existing biases and prejudices of an imperfect system. And that just shows, therefore, that what you feed in influences what you get out of these platforms.
I certainly think as well, like you said, Peter, there is a lot to watch out for in terms of the coming year and how this will, one, be regulated and also potential litigation coming from this, because it's not the first time this has been mentioned. It was circulated a few times last year, the issues around copyright, but I think this is one of the bigger stories that's going to come out. And
Yes.
as you said, AI is still not fully regulated in the UK nor the EU, so be interested to see what they are then going to put in the regulation and the law in terms of how copyright is to be treated in terms of AI and LLMs.
Yeah, indeed. You would hope that the regulators will take a lead in making it clear how the AI platforms should be operating so as to preserve the rights of the actual original content creators.
Thanks, Peter. So moving on to our final story of this discussion. So we are going to be talking about Google. I mean, hey, we're first news story of 2024 and already hitting one of the big guys. And we are looking at Google here, and more specifically, Google settling the 5 billion privacy lawsuits. And this is in relation to incognito mode. So for users that aren't aware, incognito mode is essentially where on your Chrome browser you intentionally select incognito mode to surf the internet without their activity being saved to the browser or device. However, the websites visited can use tools such as Google Analytics to track usage, and that kind of defeats the whole object. So, like I just explained, incognito, you're supposed to not have anything saved or tracked, and yet here we are with Google Analytics enabled.
Well, I think that's just it, Amelia. I think it's a difference of perceptions. It is clear, I think, that users, and this is what the case would have been arguing, is to say that users would have thought that if you click on something that says incognito, has a little logo of a sort of a private investigator hat and spectacles, that you may have had reason to then believe that you were sort of in a secret mode and that therefore Google or anyone else wouldn't be able to track you. So I think the innocent idea behind this is, say that you use or share a device with someone else. It could be a desktop PC at home, and you want to buy a gift for your partner online. That you think, well, if I go on an incognito mode and I then search for flowers and I make the delivery setting, I go through and arrange the delivery and do the payment, that then once I've done that and I've closed the window, that then if my partner comes and looks at the device, then looks at the history, they won't see that I'd ordered this thing for them and it won't spoil the surprise. That's the innocent use for this technology. Obviously, it can be used for various different reasons, which we won't go into or explore in detail on this podcast, but you kind of get the idea. Now, the point is that it looks like you may think that it is incognito and no one can look at it, but it turns out that Google could actually look at and see what you are doing the whole time.
So that means realistically, so you've just bought your wife some flowers, then all of a sudden she'll be shopping on, I don't know, Amazon or any other sort of retail device, and all of a sudden, oh look, there's an ad for some beautiful flowers. Oh, maybe I should get some flowers. Oh look, there's a place locally that does them. Wouldn't it be nice to order some? Therein lies the problem.
Yes, but pretty much you've exactly hit the nail on the head. Interestingly, apparently there was a memo, an internal memo written from Google's marketing chief, sent to the CEO, that contained a bullet point that said, "Make incognito truly private." And this was around a discussion about the fact that, in essence, data from incognito was used for the exact purposes that you've just outlined, Amelia, in terms of saying, well, you might use it to enhance your experience online and find products and services that might be of use, and blah, 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 blah. So, yeah, clearly Google was using that data for the things that Google uses data for. Shock. The only difference being that you may have thought Google won't use its data for the things that Google uses data for. If I'm in incognito, well, surprise, surprise, that's not the case. When you're using the specific browser that Google designed and built for that purpose.
Interesting from a privacy perspective, certainly. And I mean, the interesting thing is the fact they were like, oh, well, we've been very clear with the fact that we've been transparent and upfront about data and how it's collected from users in the incognito mode. And even if many users assumed otherwise, well, if you know many users assumed otherwise, make it abundantly clear, why don't you?
Or don't call it incognito. call
Yeah,
it something else.
call it your browser history isn't recorded mode. Not quite
Yeah,
as catchy, but there we
yeah,
are.
yeah,
Does what it
something,
says on the
yeah,
tin.
yeah. But and in terms of the position on this, then this is a suit that has been settled. So it's not going to go to court and involve lots of expensive, costly filings, and where Google would have to transparently say, this is what we've ended up, this is what we were actually doing. We should also say that, $5 billion that was being claimed, they weren't necessarily paid out 5 billion. And bear in mind that Google made 300, I think it turned over 300 billion last year. So therefore, 5 billion is going to be a drop in the ocean for a corporation of this size.
Exactly. And I mean, the terms of the settlement have not been made public, but
Yeah.
the original complaint included demands of between kind of $100 and $1,000 per plaintiff, so per claimant. And the suit said there could be millions. So again, we are talking about kind of a mere drop in the ocean for the likes of Google, but nonetheless, we are seeing the fact that they are going to have to settle, and clearly they don't want the facts about this matter really coming out, because otherwise they wouldn't have settled so early on.
Indeed.
So that was our final story of the podcast, and a big thank you again to Anson Evaluate for helping to produce this webinar. And if you are interested to learn more about Anson Evaluate's products and services, please visit their website, www.ansonevaluate.com. And as well, please feel free to reach out to us if you have any questions about anything that we've talked about on this podcast. So that's admin@digitallawuk.com if you have any questions, or I think Peter, you mentioned earlier whether you've seen any slaps or
If you've been affected by any of the issues discussed in
Exactly. And just a reminder as well, these podcasts are available on our YouTube, our Facebook, literally wherever you can find our podcast or a podcast link, you will find us. Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music, you know where we are. So thank you for listening, and we hope to see you again next week.